Hello, 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 everyone. Welcome to another symposium brought to you by the National Alliance for the Advancement of Haitian Professionals, also known as NAAHP. My name is Kanesha, Lenore, Jean-Baptiste, and it is my honor to be here with you all this evening, moderating a discussion on how COVID-19 is changing the nonprofit sector. I have served in the nonprofit community for over 10 years, with my recent efforts bringing me to Youth Collaboratory, focusing on the combating of human trafficking and advancing for housing justice in the lives of young people across the nation. I'm excited to be here tonight in great company on an historic inauguration night. To tonight's panelists, I am so thankful to be here with you all. We are excited for this conversation, and thank you for your commitment to this very critical conversation. And to our virtual community, we encourage the audience to submit those questions, engage in conversation with us, and towards the end of this conversation, we will be having a live Q&A. But before we jump into this critical dialogue, I would like for each of you to please introduce yourselves, and I'm speaking to our amazing panelists. Introduce yourselves to our viewers and tell us a little bit about your organization and your work. We are going to do introductions in alphabetical order, beginning with Dr. Alix.
Thank you so much, Kanesha. Once again, my name is Alix Cantave, and I'm a program officer with the Kellogg Foundation. Just very quickly about the Kellogg Foundation, I lead the foundation's work in Haiti, where we're really focusing primarily on in two micro-regions, the central area of Haiti in the Southwest Corridor. The Kellogg Foundation, we are a very value-driven institution. Our focus is really how do we help create conditions for vulnerable children to thrive. And we focus in basically three fundamental areas and one cross-cutting area: education, health, family economic security, or what we're calling employment equity. But fundamental to our work is our DNA, that is racial equity, civic engagement, and leadership. So this is a very quick view of the Kellogg Foundation. And we're based in Battle Creek, Michigan, and we are now entering our 90th anniversary.
Incredible. Thank you, Alix. And to Blane. We can't hear you, Blane.
All right. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. My name is Blane Stoddart. I am a businessman in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, but I'm very active in the community. I am on several boards. I sit on the board of the Anti-Defamation League. I am the vice chairman of Global Philadelphia, which is a nonprofit that's making Philadelphia a more global, mainstream city in the world. And I'm here tonight to represent, I am the president of Young Caribbean Professionals in Philadelphia. And as president of Young Caribbean Professional Network, we have a scholarship program. We have a professional development program. We have networking events for college students and young professionals. And I'm here representing Young Caribbean Professional Network and here to talk about how nonprofits are faring with the pandemic and in an economy where 50 million people are out of work. So with that, I think I've said enough, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Blane. And to Mr. Hugh.
Hey there, Hugh Ballou. I'm coming in from western side of Virginia. You see the Blue Ridge Mountains, the beautiful Blue Ridge Mountains behind me. And in the South, we speak Southern. I've had a long career as a musical conductor, this little stick that you stand in front of the orchestra or the choir. And I've also been a businessman. I've taken what I've learned in building high-performance teams and building revenue streams, and I founded CenterVision Leadership Foundation. CenterVision is the truncation of the word synergy and vision. So I work with leaders, clarifying their vision, and then building synergy with the teams. So we transform leaders, transforming organizations, transforming lives. And so what could you accomplish in the space where you work if you had more ability to impact more people's lives and had more revenue to do that? So this is my volunteer work in my senior year. So I I'm passionate, and I work with nonprofits doing a lot of different things all over, and it's quite amazing. And so there's some fundamental things missing in what we weren't taught about leadership and what we weren't taught about organizational development. And those are the foundations that we need to be able to then attract the right people for volunteers, board members, and supporters with time, talent, and money in all aspects. So it's my joy to be here and to share some things that I've learned over 32 years of working with leaders, building powerful organizations.
Incredible. Thank you. And to Miss Ketsia.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you this evening. My name is Ketsia Saint-Armand, and I'm joining you all from Queens, New York this evening. And so I'm excited to be here to talk with you all about some of the financial impacts on nonprofits due to the pandemic and the resulting economic crisis. I currently work as a senior strategy associate at Nonprofit Finance Fund. Nonprofit Finance Fund is a national community development finance institution based out of New York, and we do three things. First is we provide strategic insights to nonprofit organizations that are exploring financial and business model questions. The second thing that we do is we provide financing primarily through the form of loans to nonprofit organizations that are seeking working capital and bridge loans. And then the third thing that we do is we gather the insights from the work that we do with our clients around consulting, as well as the work that we do with our clients around lending, to generate insights that we can share with the broader field, particularly when it comes to advocating for changes in funding and financing practices. So I've been with Nonprofit Finance Fund for a little over a year, and my background is really in working with nonprofit organizations, as well as working in for-profit organizations, primarily larger banks. And so I grew up in the education sector, and that's where I worked for a number of years, almost a decade actually, before transitioning over to financial services, where I really wanted to gain a deep understanding of how capital allocation decisions are made and what drives strategy. And I've been able to bring both of those things with me to my current role at Nonprofit Finance Fund, where I work with our executive and leadership team to drive our strategic implementation, particularly when it comes to providing support to community-centered organizations led by and serving people of color. And so right now we're on an exciting journey to really see how we can serve the field in new and different ways. And outside of Nonprofit Finance Fund, I'm also a member of the Global Shapers community. I was a member in Pittsburgh and also curator there. And I recently helped to found the Queens Hub. And we're excited to partner with organizations here as well to really amplify their work and provide them with access to the World Economic Forum's platform. And outside of that, I also do advising for impact startups through Shaper Impact Capital. So looking forward to conversing with all the great panelists here today.
Thank you so much, Ketsia. And last but not least, we would like to pivot on to Mr. Williamson.
Hey, thank you so much. Thanks for having me. If you can see the hotel that I'm staying, there's no internet. So I was on my way to Port-au-Prince and I said, I need to jump in no matter what happens. So thanks for having me. My name is Williamson from Haiti. I live in Utah. So I get to come to this country every 2 months. And I started a RISE project for humanity 5 years ago when I came to Utah. As a survivor from the earthquake in Haiti, I felt like my mission on earth was to empower my people. I was the only survivor for my entire high school from the earthquake. So I started this organization. In order for me to really make a difference in my own country, I want to share with them the principles that have helped me, that have carried me where I am today. So we started this mentorship program where we mentor young people across Haiti. So today we have over 300 mentors all across Haiti. It's all about Haitians, mentoring Haitians. And now we are building the first mentoring center in the Caribbean. I'm working with Kevin Hart, and that's exactly why I'm here in Haiti right now, to see the land, to see exactly where we're building the mentoring center. I'm going to be here tomorrow with Venus Brown. He's Justin Timberlake manager. They are here to see the work we're doing in Haiti. So it's such a wonderful work to see that Haitians can empower other Haitians through mentoring. So thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. And again, thank you to all of our panelists. So our first question tonight is actually going to go back to you, Mr. Williamson. But before we go into that, I think it's very critical for us to say just thank you to your work and your service that you're doing on the ground now in Haiti. And we just appreciate that you jumped on this live stream for us to be able to have this conversation. So the question, Mr. Williamson, is really focused on, we've seen that volunteerism, financial aid, and in-kind support are very crucial to nonprofits and have unfortunately been impacted due to the most recent pandemic. And have you experienced, or do you foresee any long-term financial impacts to organizations that serve young people in Haiti?
Hey, let's see. I will say but for us, it's really about Haitians mentoring Haitians. That's the key of our organization. It's mentoring. So the answer to your question is yes. Why? Because I've been in Haiti. I'm from Haiti. I've been there. I know how hard it is for Haitians to know that they can make change, because one of the main key in our mission is help them change the mindset. Once they change the mindset, they can create the life, and then they can go and impact the community. This is our mission, to help Haitians to change the mindset, create the life, and impact the community. So a long-term solution would only come within Haitians themselves, because we believe that the long-term solutions we are looking for, it must come from Haitians themselves. So what I believe is that Haitians are capable of change, and it's something that must happen within them. So I truly believe that if we can teach Haitians how they can empower their own people, now we can just leave and let them do it themselves.
Thank you for that.
Teach Haitians how they
Yes.
can empower their own people.
So yeah, for the community, by the community. So Ms. Ketsia, I want to really bring you into this conversation. So similarly, can you share some of the financial impacts that many nonprofits are experiencing during the COVID pandemic? And then we want to go into radical reimagination, right? So then can you share with us 1 or 2 strategies to combat or lessen any of these financial challenges?
Sure. So to start with the first portion of your question, really what we've seen, particularly as we get more data from organizations that are closing their books out for 2020, is that there's been a decrease in organizational revenue, both in terms of contributions, so cash donations in particular, as well as grants and fees. And then we also see that in terms of revenue that these organizations earn for services that they provide to communities, in a lot of cases, especially for organizations that provide their services in person, their revenue has declined. And so organizations are really feeling this, both in terms of what they can raise through donations and in terms of what they can earn through the services that they provide or the products that they sell. And so that leaves a lot of nonprofits in a really unfortunate bind, because even before the pandemic, we knew that nonprofit organizations in the United States, on average, had 3 months of cash or less. About 50% of nonprofit organizations did not have the resources to last more than 3 months. And so this tells us that a lot of organizations were already precarious. And we know that in communities of color in particular, also within grassroots organizations, that the situation was even more challenging. But still, these organizations were doing the work, because for them, doing the work is kind of what's most important. And so they leveraged a lot of non-cash resources like goodwill from the community, people willing to pitch in, volunteerism, like you said. And while a lot of organizations are still figuring out how to pivot in this moment, that level of support for their communities is still there. And so many organizations are now just having to rethink their business models, how they provide services, how they reach the people that they want to serve. And there's been a lot of really great innovation. I can think of a client that I had, a performing arts client, where everything was shut down. And so they were able to tap into their archival footage and set up a subscribers program for people to be able to have these really great streamed concert experiences. People got to dress up, dance, have some wine that was shipped to their houses. And so organizations are really taking advantage of this moment to be really creative with how they continue to deliver on their mission, and in some ways are actually able to revitalize their business models, because not everybody's business model was working before the pandemic either. And in terms of what organizations can do to kind of navigate through this challenge, first is really develop a strong understanding of your financials, starting with your cash flow on a monthly basis. Some clients, we've even recommended taking a look at cash flow on a weekly basis. Know what is coming in, what is coming out, and what is going to be in your bank account at the end of the day, and distinguish that from revenue. And then the second thing is take some time to look at your business model. And by that, we mean take a look at the revenue and expense tied to each of your programs and try to get an understanding of how these programs affect your financial bottom line, and then compare that with the mission impact that you know these programs have. Oftentimes, when going through this exercise, we find that sometimes programs people thought were like these big rainmakers for the organization actually aren't, but they really align with the mission. And so by thinking about programs in that way, you can really sharpen your fundraising efforts if you know what the gap is between the revenue currently being brought in by that program and what you actually need to run it. And then lastly, evaluate your opportunities. Think about how you can meet people differently and reach them differently. And I think for frontline organizations as well, things are moving really fast. They're only going to move faster in the next couple of months as things really accelerate. And so I think don't feel bad if you don't have time to focus on the financials. That is what people like me who sit in chairs all day are for. Don't feel bad if you don't. Try and get a sense of where you are, but focus ultimately on delivering the work. And then as things let up, hopefully you'll have a chance to think about strategy and financials a bit more.
That is some gems, Ketsia. And, some of the things and my takeaways and I'm pulling out is just really understanding where you are and not being afraid to radically reimagine where you want to be. So that's incredible. Thank you so much for that. Dr. Alix, I want to bring you into the conversation. It's no secret that COVID-19 has disproportionately impacted communities of color and even exposed areas needing systematic change. Alix, I'm curious to know, in your role of identifying and nurturing positive systematic change within communities, what are some strengths or strategies that you see happening that center communities of color that we didn't see before COVID?
Sure. I mean, let me just speak from the perspective, the Kellogg Foundation, we are a private funder, right? So we see a lot of the issues that Kanesha raised around organization that comes to us for funding. What's happening with COVID? I mean, and from a private foundation perspective, what we've seen, what we've known all along was that you have systemic inequities in several sectors, in education, healthcare, employment, and you name it. Those are systemic. And basically what COVID did was to really expose those systemic inequities, right? And again, we can go on in any sector. We can identify any sector, whether it's in education in terms of children, healthcare, employment. As colleagues, they share about 50 million people out of work. There's 55 million kids that are learning from home right now. What do we see, right? In terms of systemic inequities, so basically, I don't even know where to start because it is huge in terms of the issues of these inequities that I'm referring to. They're systemic. They've been with us for a long time. And we've seen that manifested in 2020, okay? How do we respond to that? So I think there's a challenge we have to pose to organizations like my own, right? Like the Kellogg Foundation. How do we respond? We pride ourselves in being a racial equity institutions. We've been dealing with issues of racial inequities in the US for a long time. So what are we seeing? We're seeing the impact on children, but in terms of frontline workers and their children. We're seeing the impact on the digital divide and the impact that's going to have long-term on minority children and children of color. I think what we're trying to do is to say, okay, what can we do? What can organizations like the Kellogg Foundation and others can do? One decision we've made was to increase our payout by 50% in the next 2 years, right? So by increasing our payout by 50%, the hope is that we'll work with our local partners, community partners, nonprofit partners to address some of these issues. What are some of the challenges with that? Again, we're seeing that from our communities of color and others. You got to be prepared. We got to move our mindset from this kind of a charity to an investment mindset, to an investment model. As private donors, as private foundations, we invest. We invest in people, we invest in innovation, and we invest on good ideas. We tend to play the role of a first mover. What do I mean by that? We can go into a sector and innovate or help to innovate. Like, for example, yesterday we had our National Day of Racial Healing yesterday within the Kellogg Foundation. So we could innovate, right, and assist our partners to address systemic issues. Then the institution themselves have to be able to sustain that. We are not equipped to be a source of sustained support. Okay, so we got to figure out then, for example, when we innovate in the education sector, then municipalities, the public sector, have to then take that over, right? The same thing when we innovate in the health sector, the health sector, the public sector or the private providers will have to take that over. So that's the role that we play. But however, though, I do feel that there's an importance in terms of how do we switch our mindset, how nonprofit can shift their mindset. It's important for us to see evidence-based approaches. You got to be able to prove in your model. You got to have proof of concept, right? It's important, again, to look at strategic alliances. How do you work with others? Again, we as foundations, we contributed to a competitive environment. While we know very well complex social problems requires kind of a strategic and multiple and impactful solutions that often cannot be done by one entity. So therefore, collaborations, strategic alliances, all are very critical. And then you got to be audacious. By audacious, I mean, we got to be able to look at not piecemeal approaches, but really impactful, what we are calling audacious projects. Like, for example, one of those examples is what we decided to do this year. At the Kellogg Foundation, we issued a racial equity challenge where we'll commit $90 million. Those are large initiatives. And those kind of initiatives have to be done with organizations that have the capacity, the ability. So which means a small organization, it is unlikely that a small organization can do it by itself. What kind of a strategic alliances that nonprofits in our sectors need to be able to create, to be a part of, to address some of the systemic problem that we see?
Definitely. Thank you so much for that, Alix. And that was a lot of information. So I hope that our viewers are taking notes. Incredible dialogue. And yes, the Racial Equity Initiative, a $90 million initiative that can make a huge impact in many of our communities. So before we continue this incredible conversation, we are going to pass it over to our NAAHP team for our first commercial sponsored break. Thank you. Stay tuned.
I'm so proud to be Haitian because just everything about being Haitian is just awesome.
Everyone know about the history of Haiti, first Black independent country in 1804.
Understanding the history of Haiti, Haitian people, you can't help but be proud of the accomplishment that have happened.
Haitian Americans have done really well in the past few years, there's still a lot more work to be done. Only about 20% of us actually have a bachelor's degree.
I understand firsthand some of the challenges that Haitian American students, graduates, and professionals have faced.
Some of them have overcome incredible adversity.
Both immigrated or asylum seekers or refugees.
There are not that many Haitian-focused scholarships, but like any other award, the NAHP Leadership Award is providing recognition for one's hard work.
As we know, college is expensive, so this scholarship fund provides the chance for a brighter future.
It felt like the universe was speaking, like I needed the money, I was intrigued, people were telling me to apply.
Going to college or graduate school can be very, very expensive. So donating to a scholarship like this would help that expense be more manageable.
Future generation of leaders, scholars, entrepreneurs,
young adults that are trying to make something of their lives.
They are rock stars. They just need the help, and they need us to help them accomplish it.
There's like this Haitian proverb that says, "Male piece shot Ballou," many hands make the load lighter.
Log in and you can donate $10, $25, $50.
It makes me think of the Malcolm X quote that education is our passport to the future. For tomorrow belongs to those who prepare for it today. It makes me happy to know that our organization is contributing to that goal, preparing others for the future.
Yes. So thank you all to tonight's viewers and to our amazing panelists. And also thank you for considering to donating and keeping us powered by the people. We are hoping to receive some donations tonight as we want to increase our scholarship funds so that we can continue empowering the young people that we also passionately seek to serve. So again, welcome back to tonight's symposium, How COVID-19 is Changing the Nonprofit Sector. So we're going to jump right back into the conversation. And Mr. Hugh, I'm going to pull you in because I think that you have a lot of gems in this conversation that you can be sharing with our audience tonight. We know that everything is moving to a virtual setting and changing how we network or conduct outreach. So in your opinion, as a transformational leadership and strategist, how can nonprofits make their organizations more attractive for collaborations in this new virtual world?
So approaching this from the perspective of a musical conductor, our leadership is pull leadership. You know, we're perceived to be dictators, but you got that little white stick I showed you. You really can't make anybody do anything. And it's just an illusion that we do. So I help people realize that we need to shift a paradigm. And so leaders are influencers. Instead of telling people what to do, we ask good questions and we invite people into the space. Now, the work that we do as nonprofit leaders is very difficult work. And we're overworked, we're underpaid, and we'd have few resources of people and time and finances usually. So we're so focused on what we're doing, we want to talk about what we're doing, when really we need to talk about why it's important and what the impact of that work is. And like Alix was saying about what Kellogg looks at is for collaboration. So it's center vision, as I said before, it's about transforming ourselves as leaders. And then we transform the culture of the organization as we do a better job using resources more effectively and efficiently to transform people's lives, because that's why we exist. We want to transform people's lives. So if we look at ourselves, James Rohn, the famous speaker, said, work on yourself harder than you work on your business. And we are in a tax-exempt business. We must generate revenue. It's not profit revenue. It's proceeds to be able to do the work that we're doing. So first, work on ourselves. Be very clear on the why, and also very clear on the impact of the work we're doing. So we attract people because of who we are, because of the presence that we have, and because of the language that we share. But the language, the word.
I can't hear.
So who can't hear?
Okay, you're back.
Mr. Hugh, you went out for us a little bit. So if you could just repeat that last sentence.
Okay. So the first off, we want to reposition our thinking as a person of influence. So we attract people to us because we're very clear on those, why we exist, what the impact is, and what our work looks like. So let's reverse the paradigm. And as we approach people, we want to know who they are. And virtual communications are very effective today because we can get a lot more done because we're not traveling as much. And we're more efficient with our time, really, because we're minimizing the number of meetings. So we can really utilize people's talents, no matter where they are, a lot more effectively. So that the opportunities have opened up, out of a tragedy can come some blessing if we look for a solution to the problem. So leaders live in the future of possibilities. Now, we have to have a framework of where we're going. As a conductor, that's called a musical score. Everybody in the orchestra, everybody in the choir knows what they're supposed to do. And people like Kanesha, can build a financial plan because we've got the strategy. We know what those things cost. So as we're talking to other organizations, we want to know about them. And if you've done your due diligence, you've looked at the competition, you've looked at the alternatives in your area, so you know what's available and where the gaps are. So if you look at complementing organizations and you know about their organization and you open the door for a conversation, start with a spirit of giving. Hey, I notice you're doing this, and how can I be supportive in your work? We tend to be overworked, and that puts us into this, what we would call siloing. We're so inbred and working in our own space that we really don't have time to think outside of the box. So I'd encourage you to get something off of your plate, delegate it to some other people in your organization, so you can start having substantive conversations. So leadership is based on relationship, communication is based on relationship, and financial and collaborations are also based on relationship. So can we have a conversation with another organization? Now, collaborations don't need to be just with, and I'll talk about this in my second slide, just with other nonprofits. There's private-public collaborations with government, and there's business and nonprofit collaborations, and there's community organizations that can collaborate together. So be clear on what you do differently, know about the other organization, and then we can have many more meetings in a row, which is a blessing and a curse, but we can have many more meetings in a row because we do this stuff on Zoom or on StreamYard or something else, where we can have these substantive conversations. But as you approach people, be very clear on, here's the goal for our conversation. Here's what I would like to achieve in the conversation. And then when you're finished, say, how can we move forward? Is there a pathway for us to move forward? So things move faster now in this virtual world, and we tend to be deeply involved in this virtual stuff, and it's exhausting, really. But we're having more conversations and we're covering more topics in my space. And I'm going to call tomorrow, and people are on the call from Singapore to Australia to Canada, California, and they're doing really good things, but they're scattered. And out of that conversation, people see some synergies where they can reach out and help each other or connect somebody in a geographic location with somebody they know. So the bottom line here is be very clear as a leader on where you're going and the value that you bring to the world. Be very clear on the structure that you have, and then look at those gaps. We don't do everything. So leaders are really good leaders identify their skills and their gaps, and they look for other organizations or other people to fill those gaps. And in the South, we say we're better together. We also say none of us is as smart as all of us. You know, we have our own grammar too. So how do we create a win-win that's greater than what we can do ourselves? So another Covey's definition of synergy is a result that's greater than the sum of the parts. So if we view this virtual tool that we have, this interconnectedness, as a possibility to achieve more, then we can put it into a positive framework and say, okay, how can we connect and how can we accomplish more if we have those substantive conversations together. And a couple of cautions: we can put more people on these calls. We want to limit the number of people in any one call, but we can expand and break out into groups. And the number of projects, since we're moving fast, we can probably create a lot more than we can handle. So do one in a row, do something we can accomplish, and then build on that. And so, as Alix was saying, there's a model of what works. You know, we've got a case and we proved the case. So at Center Vision, our motto is diversity, inclusion, and equity. So we all come to the table with talents, very different talents. So how do we look for a synergy connecting those talents, and we can do better together? So that's just kind of my read on it from Western Virginia. I sit in zip code 01 in Lynchburg, Virginia, named after John Lynch, the Quaker ferryboat captain that founded Lynchburg. And this is the poorest community in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And I'm pleased to tell you we have many, many nonprofits serving this community in many different ways.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hugh. And I really appreciate that piece around de-siloing our work in order to build community for us to do services. So thank you again. I am going to call Mr. Blane to the stage because I think that you have a lot that you can share in this next question. And really it focuses on the fact that COVID has had many devastating effects, including business closures and unfortunately a lot of job losses across the nation. In your expertise in economic development and job creation, what are some key strategies organizations, including local governments, can take to improve the economy and the environment for their local businesses and residents?
Well, again, I love your question because I was going to talk about economic development and I didn't read anything. So you're
perfect. You should have read it, but good.
Right down my alley. So you know, I don't know how many people are on. I can't see the audience, but let me just give you some statistics. In terms of COVID. In Philadelphia, which is a restaurant town, Philadelphia is one of the biggest restaurants town in the nation. 30% of our restaurants have closed. I'm going to talk about business first, and then I'm going to talk about nonprofits. Hear me out. 53% of Black businesses are gone. Small businesses are gone. We expect anywhere, we don't know yet, we're still gathering this data, but we expect 40%, 30 to 40% of majority businesses to be gone. Small businesses, you know, under 20 employees or so. Were it not for the payroll protection, many of us, including my business with my 20 employees, would be gone. So this economic stimulus is a lifeline to people. This economic stimulus that the third economic stimulus from Joe Biden, which will be $1.9 trillion, is a lifeline to us to keep people employed so that they can pay their rent and they can pay their mortgage and pay their car note. Because 65% of our GDP, gross domestic product, is consumer spending. So if in America, our economy is built on debt and spending. So if we're not buying on our credit cards, if we're not spending, this economy will go into a deep, deep recession. And that's why the economic stimulus and keeping businesses and nonprofits in business is critical to this recovery. The other thing you need to know is that Wall Street is no longer related to Main Street. Let me repeat that. Wall Street and Main Street are two different streets. There was a time in our economy where if unemployment went up to double digits, Wall Street would crash. The Dow Jones would crash. If the unemployment went to 20%, 25%, the market would continue to go up. You know why? Because they're not connected. People with disposable income or equity or savings can work online and not be affected by what Main Street is doing. Everything, retail's in trouble, walk-in retail's in trouble, any type of walk-in business is in trouble because everything is moving to an online platform. So keep that in mind. Let's talk about nonprofits, and I'm going to go answer your question about what we can do to sort of push back against this pandemic and some creative ways that we can move forward. Nonprofits. This is according to USA Today, and I think this article is kind of dated. 13% of nonprofits have suspended their operations since COVID. 13%. I think it's higher in some cities and in some poor areas. Doc would have to correct me on that, but that's a huge percentage of nonprofits suspending operations mean they went out of business. Okay. 15% have seen a revenue decline. I would double that number. This is just anecdotal evidence because I sit on 3 nonprofit boards. I would double that number to 30% have seen a revenue decline. And again, I'd love to get some feedback from the other panelists. Donations are down over 20%. And 65% of nonprofits are small nonprofits. So like Doc was saying, you know, you're going to give out a $10 million, $5 million, $20 million, $30 million grant. Those grants are not going to small nonprofits. Those grants are going to national or regional nonprofits. And then to go back to what my friend from CenterVision was saying, that's where the larger nonprofits need to partner with the smaller nonprofits so that they can also be at the table. So when these grants are going out, they can participate either as a participant or as a program sponsor or as a program delivering programs for these huge grants that come in. And so that's why collaboration in nonprofits is so important. Let's talk about what I'm going to talk about what nonprofits can do, and then I'm going to go back to what businesses can do. And then I'm going to shut up because I have a lot to say. What can nonprofits do to survive? Number one is to diversify your income. Let me tell you where nonprofits get their income. Nonprofits get their income from events, individual sponsorships and contributions, government sponsorship and contribution, and foundation sponsorships and contributions. That's where they get the bulk of their money. However, in the pandemic, nonprofits have to look at ways for earned income, which is government contracts, providing fee for service, and so on and so forth. Nonprofits also need to look at earned income. Can they buy a franchise? Can a nonprofit buy a Dunkin' Donuts and have that profit and that revenue go back to the charitable activities of that nonprofit? Nonprofit need to look at service revenues. Can they provide a service and charge for it? Like cleaning the neighborhood. Will the city pay you to form a special service district to clean up the neighborhood? And then socially focused businesses, which I mentioned already. Nonprofits have to look. Here's a good one. Thrift stores make money. Anybody get that one? I said thrift stores make money. Nonprofits have been able, like Goodwill, have been able to form thrift stores, and they're becoming multi-million-dollar organizations, moving towards a billion-dollar organization, Goodwill. So there's job training, which is fee for service. You have to look at your community and see where the needs are, and then see if, you know, so many people have depression, anxiety. My 2 sons are autistic. So fee for service. Can you get into mental health? Can you get into physical health? Can you form can you create a thrift shop? Or whatever service you're in, whatever your mission is, there's probably a service you can provide that's related to that mission, and charge for that service. So that's how we can collaborate. That's how, again, I've run at least 3 nonprofits before I started my business. So I'm very deep and steeped in the nonprofit. Before I go, I want to talk about 2 things. I want to talk about why CPN, and then I want to talk about, you know, how governments and how businesses can help nonprofits. As a matter of fact, you're going to have to come back to me because I'm so wired right now. So right now, I'm just going to shut up, and you're going to have to come back to me.
Definitely. Okay. Cheers to the being wired up. Yes.
I'm dead.
Yes. So I want to bring in Ketsia into the conversation because nonprofits are being called to serve like never before, but with limited resources in regards to funding. And I know that Blane kind of gave us some examples, but can you share what ways nonprofits can increase their funding or remain sustainable during COVID-19?
So that is more of a fundraising question. I'm going to back up a little bit and offer some context, and then just some suggestions around how to think about what kind of funding is required. So my organization was actually started in the midst of another economic crisis. The fuel embargoes that hit in 1979 and 1980 put a lot of nonprofit organizations in New York that operated settlement houses out of business because their fuel costs skyrocketed and they could no longer afford to pay their bills on time. And so at the time, a lot of these settlement houses went out, were like, we need funding to pay our bills because if we don't, we're going to get shut down, etc. But what they needed wasn't funding only to pay their bills. That was certainly part of the picture. But what they also needed was to understand why their energy costs were so high and whether or not there were opportunities to have more fuel efficient boilers, for example. And so that's why my organization was created. It was literally to lend money for these boilers because we recognized if you have a loan, you can borrow the money, remain in operation, and pay that loan back over a number of years. And so the lesson from that is, when facing a funding shortfall, it is brutal, it is difficult. We see organizations doing a lot of cash conservation tactics like not paying staff, delaying payment of invoices, taking on a lot of debt through lines of credit or credit cards. And that's hard, and I don't want to downplay that at all. But what we also know is that expending a lot of energy to fundraise purely to cover those bills without thinking about maybe what this crisis can teach you about where there are opportunities to make significant capital investments in your organization is basically missing an opportunity. And so I think that for folks who are in that really tough spot right now, where maybe nothing is going right and you're like, I have to do something now. Yes, do something now, but recognize that most nonprofits are operating two businesses at once because nonprofit is not a business model, it's a tax status. And so the two businesses that nonprofits are operating is delivering the services that funders want to pay for, that they like to see, and then running the organization, paying for administrative staff, paying for that Salesforce subscription, paying for StreamYard. This all costs money that often isn't included in the types of funding that most funders offer, which is usually linked to just direct service delivery. And so I think that given that that's the situation a lot of organizations are in, they spend a lot of money raising funds to actually run the organization. And so what I would not say is necessarily the best use of folks' time is kind of doubling down on allocating all staff to that fundraising endeavor, but it's what I mentioned earlier. Understand your financial position and have the information you need to make tough decisions, knowing that if you make some key investments down the line, you may be able to go back and hire those staff you've had to let go or repurchase that essential part of your tech stack that you are no longer able to afford for the time being. And I think, Blane, thank you so much for bringing up that thrift store example. I actually just finished doing projections with an organization in Pennsylvania that was thinking of opening a thrift store. And so this is, for me, a really great example of how you want to make sure you're thinking strategically about these decisions. So when we conducted this analysis for opening up a thrift store, what we found was that it would take 6 years for that thrift store to be able to break even. The organization would have to spend $1 million upfront, and over that 5-year period would be looking at a net cash outflow of about $2 million overall. This is not to say you shouldn't do it, but it's to say, have that information, because what you don't want to do is be 3 years in and say, where's my money? And not know that you got to wait another 3 years before you're in the black. So for all organizations right now that are thinking about maybe pivoting and getting into a different line of business, be aware of how this may have tax consequences for you in terms of generating unrelated business income that may also have an impact on your tax exemption status. Also, think about how this will change your business model. You want to get into real estate? I love it. I love it. Caribbeans love real estate. But you also are going to have a property tax bill and maintenance expenses. Know what those are. Whatever decision you make, it's going to be best for your organization. That's true. But understand what the financial ramifications will be, just like we do in personal finance, so that you don't get a couple of years in and be caught unawares and have to go back to your funders or back to the community that provided you with that upfront capital to start your project, because you didn't plan for what the trajectory was going to look like. And then for government contracting, I just wanted to add, the government right now at municipal, federal, and state levels is really challenged when it comes to government contracting. So the timeline from starting a conversation to actually having a contract and getting paid that we generally see is about 15 months. And so know that these are all long-term plays that would require, in many cases, significantly repositioning your business models. For government contracting, that's going to require an investment in compliance staff. And it's also going to require maybe investments in tech systems that are needed to really track those grants. And so just be aware that nothing is free money. Everything comes with some sort of trade-off, but the better you know what those trade-offs are and the more you can plan around them, the more quick you'll be to decide what is best for you moving forward. Diversification works for some folks, but there's a great Stanford Social Innovation Review article that talks about how actually a lot of what we see is not necessarily diversification driving high financial performance, but focusing on what you're good at and doing that really well and getting paid for it from all of the relevant parties involved. And so there are multiple paths to scale and to sustainability. Do the analysis, do the research, make the choice, and then evaluate as you go along to see how things are going so that you can adjust.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. Full disclosure, I went to the Wharton School, University of Pennsylvania. So we don't start any business without doing a 10-year projection. And so I have to agree with you 100%. You know, these are great ideas that I brought up, but all of these have to have the financial analysis to make sure that before you step out, that the numbers are there. We just started at my job, we do construction project management. We have a staff of 20. We just started our first development company to build affordable and workforce housing. But the only reason we're able to do that is I have 28 years in the business. So I was doing it for other people, and we said, why don't we start our own company to build our own affordable housing? And we have our first project coming up in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. It's a 49-unit affordable housing project, low-income housing tax credit finance by the Pennsylvania Housing Authority, by the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency. But again, if we couldn't do a 20-year cash flow projection and do all the pro formas, a 59-page pro forma, I would tell you not to do it.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, mission matters more, just as much, if not more, than money. And so I want to be clear that my position is not the numbers always have to make sense. But if you're in the red, at least you know it, and you got a story that you can tell around it, and you can fundraise for covering those expenses. That's all from me.
The numbers have to make sense. I want to call Mr. Hugh into the conversation. Do you have anything that you wanted to add in regards to this?
Sure, and I'm so much in favor of long-term planning and doing financial projections to look at what you're going to need. But look at another pocket of money. Corporate sponsorships is a pocket of marketing. It's not easy, but if you have a fundraising professional on your staff, they can make presentations for that. They can write grants, which is for special projects. And corporations, we're spending a lot of money on sports sponsorships that aren't happening. So maybe they might have some money if you just let them know you got something that's important and you could highlight their brand. In-kind donations, companies give employee time, companies give space. There's lots of things where you can save cash. And then what I call partner income, local religious groups, churches and synagogues and Rotary groups fund food charities or health charities, whatever. They give a little money to, a lot of them give a money to the charity. So you partner with them, you get some volunteers and you get some money. And then not to overlook the big long-term develop relationships with people who want to leave a legacy. And that's where a giving professional, a development professional can help you show them how they could leave a donation in their will to create a legacy program under their name or of their choice. So those are some others to think about, which aren't easy, but they go in your mix of funding and in your long-term planning.
If I might, Kanesha, and I appreciate what you say, Ketsia and Blane, around what's happening in terms of the challenges facing the nonprofit sector. Prior to joining the Kellogg Foundation, of course, academia and all that stuff, I used to work for a group called Local Initiative Support Corporation, LISC. And I'm still on the board. I know you guys. That's why I'm bringing it up, because I know you know LISC. And I'm on the board of a CDC in Boston where I live. And what have we seen? I'm using that as an example, in terms of looking at the nonprofit sector. A nonprofit has a mission, right? And hopefully that mission relates to specific problems, either at a larger or in a place, right? Either in a neighborhood or a larger problem. When you look at what's happening in the nonprofit sector today, I think we got to ask ourselves, are the nonprofit now exist for their own purposes? Right? Because what we're seeing is, particularly in the CDC sector, right? You're seeing then encroaching on others' territories because they've built enough, not enough, but sufficient or a large number of affordable housing in their individual place because they are place-based entity, right? So now they're encroaching upon other CDC's territory. I'm sure you probably see some of that in Philly. I did some work in Philly. I built one of the first supermarket there, right? Yeah. So the issue is there a time when you said, okay, let's come back, let's reassess, and let's reevaluate to see, do we need 50 nonprofit in a community or do we need 10? So if we need 10, then what's the process to get there? Because I hear you about the drop in revenue. Foundations have more money than ever before. There's no shortage of money. I can attest to that, right? We have no shortage of money. The issue is, how do we invest it strategically? How do we minimize what we see as duplication of efforts, right? So I think there's a point where you're saying, okay, do we, sometimes I say that when somebody approach me as a program officer and say, we need to do this so we can stay open. We're not in the business of necessarily keeping nonprofits open. We are in the business of helping to solve social problems. So therefore, if you're no longer relevant, or there's somebody who can do it better, or who is doing it better in the same community, what is it that you expect funders to do? Right? Because what I'm seeing in some communities, particularly in our communities of color, we have a saturation of nonprofit organizations. And I think that's
can I say
part of the
something?
problem. Sure.
Doc, I think to answer your question is, I think you're hitting the nail on the head, because for 10 years, all the major funders, including NPP, including LISC, including Ford, including Pew, including William Penn, we're all doing capacity building. And I think rather than everybody doing the same thing, the whole foundation, rather than that, to answer the question that you just raised, to look at strategic mergers, acquisitions, and to look at financial planning as part of capacity building, and then fund from a position of strength so that communities could. I mean, it happens in the for-profit sector every day. I'm trying to buy a company to grow my company because we cannot grow organically in this economy. And large companies do it every day, but small businesses think that I should die running my business and pass it on to my children, or nonprofits think I should die running this nonprofit or pass it on to the next person, rather than thinking strategically about what is the best way, number one, to benefit the community, and while I'm benefiting the community, what is the best way to have impact? And I think that instead of talking capacity, we need to be asking the questions that you just raised.
I mean, that's a finger snap, right? And that was a word to the funders. So
now, again, I'm not trying to say that, and let me just be clear, right? I'm saying nonprofits are extremely helpful to communities, right? But there's this constant assessment that we have to do, this self-evaluation, and saying, in a community, like for example, one of our big challenges right now because of COVID is the digital divide. We have so many children of colors who simply do not have adequate access or adequate technology to be able to effectively do their work online. And we still don't know yet the consequences in terms of long term. We suspect older children, the older kids who are 17, who are going to be 18, 19, when they're able to go fully back to the classroom, are they going to go back? Right? So we have real systemic challenges with regard to some of these issues. And just naming one, that's just one, right? 55 million children are now learning from home. What kind of home are they learning from? Do they have the connectivity to do it? Those of us, as you're saying, Blane, who could work remotely, we're fine, right? We've been doing it. We have enough bandwidth, right? But think about folks in certain areas, in rural areas, in Virginia, West Virginia, in Mississippi, where people do not have good connectivity. Not every community is equal when it comes to connectivity. So which communities are not? Most of this kind of programs that you are running or that's required for online learning are really large bandwidth. If you don't have it, you cannot. They will just cut you off. They will just log you off. And what happened to a child who's having difficulty connecting? They just don't do the work. What is the impact of that? How is our communities equipped to respond to that? What's our response to that? It's not clear yet how we're going to respond to those things. What are the organizations that's going to respond? Is it going to be the school systems? Who's going to do it? The school district, the state, the federal government, communities? We're not clear. We're not sure yet how we're going to do these things. And that's just one issue.
Thank you so much for bringing that issue.
I'm gonna pass off all my time to the rest of the group, Madam Chair, because I'm wired. The doc has me fired up right now. So I was wondering, I sit on these committees a lot, and the talking heads talk, and then leave 5 minutes for questions. So I was wondering, again, that was just an idea I have. I will cede my time.
Definitely. Thank you so much for that. And now into a very important initiative is the NAHP commercial that we're going to be having to talk about our scholarships, which is critical to our community as well. So I'll pass it over to
I'm so proud to be Haitian because just everything about being Haitian is just awesome.
Everyone know about the history of Haiti, first Black independent country, and it's for
understanding the history of Haiti, Haitian people, you can't help but be proud of the accomplishment that have happened.
Haitian Americans have done really well in the past few years. There's still a lot more work to be done. Only about 20% of us actually have a bachelor's degree.
I understand firsthand some of the challenges that Haitian American students, graduates, and professionals have faced.
Some of them have overcome incredible adversity.
Both immigrated or asylum seekers or refugees.
There are not that many Haitian-focused scholarships, but like any other award, the NAHP Leadership Award is providing recognition for one's hard work.
As we know, college is expensive, so this scholarship fund provides the chance for a brighter future.
It felt like the universe was speaking, like I needed the money. I was intrigued. People were telling me to apply.
Going to college or graduate school can be very, very expensive. So donating to a scholarship like this would help that expense be more manageable.
Future generation of leaders, scholars, entrepreneurs,
young adults that are trying to make something of their lives.
They are rock stars. They just need the help, and they need us to help them accomplish it.
There's like this Haitian proverb that says, Ballou, many hands make the load lighter.
Log in and you can donate $10, $25, $50.
It makes me think of the Malcolm X quote that education is our passport to the future. For tomorrow belongs to those who prepare for it today. It makes me happy to know that our organization is contributing to that goal, preparing others for the future.
Awesome. Great. The NAAHP Haitian American Leadership Award Scholarship awards outstanding Haitian and Haitian American students studying in the United States, but also rely on donation. Last year, due to our global pandemic, we had to cancel the annual NAAHP conference, our primary source of income. But what we know for sure is that we will not stop, or we will not continue to empower our communities because of a virus, because a virus cannot stop the mission. But now more than ever, we need your support. Consider donating to our scholarship fund and other NAAHP programs. Thank you so much for your consideration and donating to keeping us powered by the people. So back, and we will love to see, we want some folks to do some pledges, right? And as we're talking about funding and as we are talking about money, it is important for us to continue on sustaining a lot of organizations that are doing the work. I have one more question that I'm going to want to engage our panelists, and I want us to be mindful of time, because after this question, we are going to open it up to our viewers for us to have our live Q&A. So our final question for this evening really focuses on partnerships. We know that partnerships have always been critical to nonprofits. However, traditional partnerships may not be enough right now. So what are some unique and new partnerships or alliances do nonprofits need to begin considering that they may not have considered prior to COVID-19? And this is open up to all of our panelists that would like to engage in this discussion.
So I'd like to pursue what I started before. You probably have business leaders already on your board, and they probably want to do more. And so to have a conversation about what are some business skills that we need to learn? And by the way, is it good for business to be more present in the community, doing this community work with your nonprofit? And so I mentioned the partner funders like the social clubs and the religious organizations. There's the churches, synagogues, mosques. There's also the judicatories like districts or districts. But there's also national boards, like I know the Methodist Church, looking across at the Capitol in DC, has the Church and Society, where each church has a committee that works in society. So those are some, and also the larger nonprofits can help you as a smaller one, and you could do a piece that they're not able to do. So there's lots of ways to think about partnerships. And as our colleague from Kellogg, Alix, said, that's more attractive to funder because they know you're creating more impact because you're working together.
Thank you. Anyone else want to chime in on that?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would add to that is to think about it as action-oriented partnership, right? Identifying what the issue is you want to address together, be clear, right? And then try to form the partnership around specific issues or specific action items and be strategic about it.
Amen.
Anything else? Ketsia, I see that smile. Do you have anything that you want to add into this?
To be honest, nothing that wasn't said already. And I just wanted to mention that for organizations that might be thinking about partnerships, there's a great resource called the Partnering Initiative. And there are also a lot of others. There's also, I believe, one called the Collaborative Impact, where you can check out guides that they have to think about the process of forming partnerships. And that, as in anything, it's important to be planful. Check out some guides, understand what the process is from going to a relationship to an action-oriented partnership, and then see if that's best for you and how you'd like to go about doing it.
Definitely. All right. That was some great questions that we had. That was a great question and amazing answers. So thank you all for that. We are now going to move to the next segment of our symposium, and it's my favorite. It's powered by the people, and this is our Q&A. So the first question that we have is coming from Manny, and the question is, whose role is it to measure impact through quality evaluation? Measuring impact in the true sense is extremely expensive, especially impact evaluation, which can be technical and expensive.
So I'm going to add a disclaimer that all views that I have shared today are not necessarily a reflection of those of my employer. Now, when it comes to measuring impact, the first thing you note is that it's expensive. Now, at Nonprofit Finance Fund, even though there's a really core idea that we have that when you're engaging with a funder, it is important for that funder to understand the importance of covering your full costs. But as a nonprofit organization, it's up to you to know what the full cost of delivering your service is. And so if part of your work is ensuring that you're evaluating the impact so you can validate your theory of change, that needs to be baked into the amount of funding that you are asking for so that the cost of doing that work can be covered. Now, I think that there are certainly always opportunities for synergies and partnering with funders to measure impact. That's something you can discuss as part of going through the partnership roadmap and having those conversations along the way. But ultimately, it's important to be clear on what the cost of measuring impact will, at least initially, as you're starting some of those funder-related conversations. And then also being clear about how that is going to get covered if understanding your impact, which I hope it is really important to you so that you can figure out how to keep doing what you're doing or how to pivot. And so in terms of whose role it is to measure the impact, I think there are a lot of different ways of thinking about this, but often it's who's closest to the work and how are you making sure that you're centering the voices of people who are actually on the receiving end of your services in evaluating the impact that you're having. That's all. That's my piece.
Yeah. What I would add to that is it is everyone's role who's involved. It is the funders as it is the implementers. It's all the stakeholders' role to make sure that you have good impact, good program evaluation, whether it's an impact evaluation or not. But I think it's everyone's role. And I think funders need to fund more evaluations.
Do we have anyone that want to chime in?
Yeah, you have to decide what you're going to measure. I think it was Einstein that said not everything can be counted counts and everything that counts can be counted. So what is it we're quantifying? How do we evaluate, and what kind of impact do we want to talk about, and what are the intangibles in there? So I agree with what everybody said. It's a very difficult space, but it's a very important space.
Mm-hmm, definitely. So our next question that we have here on the screen is, can nonprofits benefit from looking at the restructuring that businesses are going through due to COVID-19 and sort of copy that scheme to keep their heads above water?
So
again,
if you, I'll say something really quickly, but like if you've worked in business, you know that you don't merge because things are going badly. That's not the rationale for merging. You merge because there's a business case to be made for merging. In the nonprofit sector, mergers and acquisitions happen all the time. And to be honest, if we look at New York, a lot of nonprofit consolidation happened after the Great Recession because organizations found that there were greater efficiencies to be had by combining their operations. So I think that nonprofits should always be considering merger opportunities as part of their ongoing operations. It's just another tool in the toolkit and not necessarily something that they need to copy from how businesses do it, because there is a body of practice for nonprofits doing restructures as well as doing mergers.
I can't repeat this enough, that a lot of nonprofits are weak, maybe weak on operations and weak on technical finance issues. And I think that in a time where everybody is facing financial contraction, can you hear me?
Yes.
Where everybody's facing financial contraction, we need to look at programs. Nonprofits need to look at programs. They need to look at strategy. They need to look at impact. And then they need to look at the numbers. And a combination of that, maybe I'm leaving something out, a combination, it's almost like SWOT analysis. You want to look at strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. COVID is a threat. It is a threat to everybody except Amazon. And so you have to look at the situation in your community. Doc talked about, you have to look to see if your services are portable. You have to look if you're place-based. Doc kind of mentioned this. Place-based nonprofits are kind of in trouble because a lot of times they are bordering other nonprofits that are delivering the same services. So they have to look at duplication of services. So all of this, everybody needs to be doing a SWOT. The answer to your question, I'm sorry, the partial answer to your question, because we have a financial expert here. The partial answer to your question is everybody needs to be doing SWOT analysis to see what the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats are to their line of service or business. And I think that's what everybody needs to be doing. And then see from the SWOT analysis what the opportunities are, and then see if those opportunities are feasible, financially feasible, or if they're going to rip the organization apart politically or financially. The other thing I want to say is, as you go through this analysis, don't be scared to spend a little money to bring in an outsider, to have your board look at the strategy to see if you're going down the wrong rabbit hole and if you need to change course. Or a lot of times there's just some slight change that you can do to really change the financials and the outlook for your organization.
I think there's good business models and there's bad business models. So if you do what he suggests and hire an expert to help you decipher, we can learn good things, we can observe bad things. So there's a discernment piece of which one we want to model.
This is true. So we have a question in from Jocelyn. Any data on how COVID-19 is specifically impacting the Haitian nonprofit sector in the United States and abroad? Haiti would be appreciated, a focus on the island.
I mean, I can answer my good friend the latest part of Johnny's question, which is really what's going on in Haiti, as opposed to I can say something about that, Johnny. And what's basically going on in Haiti is not just because of COVID. So basically since 2018, if you recall, since July of 2018, it's been difficult to travel to Haiti. So basically, when you look at what's happening after in July of 2018, then you look at Paylock in 2019, and then COVID in 2020. What has been happening is that it's been difficult for nonprofits underground in Haiti to invite funders to come in. So there's basically been a lack of visits. Many funders have not been able to go to Haiti. So as a result of that, there's been a decrease, a very significant decrease in funding going through Haitian organizations. So I think that's the first part of it. And we've seen that in many organizations. And again, because when you look at the COVID is global, right? Unlike other issues in Haiti, everybody's in trouble. Everybody needs, for example, we saw with COVID specifically, it took a long time before PPEs could get to Haiti, right? Before the tests could get to Haiti. And I presume it's going to be difficult, even though there's a network set up for the vaccines to get to Haiti. So there's been a really decrease in funding going to nonprofit in Haiti since, not only because of COVID, but because of Paylock and then now COVID. So the groups in Haiti are really struggling right now. And I leave someone else to answer the part about Haitian organizations in the US. This is specifically in terms of what's going on to some extent underground in Haiti. Like, for example, Johnny, I used to travel to Haiti every month. Members of my team from the Kellogg Foundation, we used to be in Haiti on average every month. We have not been in Haiti since September 2019. Even though we continue our grant making to Haiti has increased. But it's difficult to create and cultivate new relationships when you're not able to go to the ground. So we have not really cultivated new relationships. We have been funding our typical kind of our trusted organizations we've been working with, but not necessarily being able to be on the ground to cultivate new relationships.
Thank you for that. Do we have any panelists that would like to chime in on any data on how COVID-19 is specifically impacting Haitian nonprofits?
As far as I'm aware, there's no data source or large-scale survey that's been conducted of Haitian, I'm assuming this is Haitian-led and Haitian community serving nonprofit organizations. There are some general surveys out there, though, from National Council of Nonprofits. They have a state-by-state breakdown and some regional breakouts, too, that can be helpful in starting to answer some of those questions.
Thank you so much, Ketsia. So for our next question, is it common for nonprofits to seek funds to help restructure themselves in a sustainable, profitable way? Is that something that actually appeals to funders if that is included in their strategy?
To answer the first question, yes, absolutely. It is very common for nonprofit organizations to seek out what we call at NFF change capital. The idea of change capital is that it is a large, non-recurring source of funding that is meant to be spent down over a defined timeline and cover planned deficits that occur on the way to an organization shifting its business model. Because as we know, as Blane mentioned, sometimes you might start offering a service, but the government contract isn't going to come in the door for another 15 or 24 months. And so change capital really helps you to cover the cost of making that shift while waiting for the relationships that will allow you to generate revenue based on the programs or services that you're offering to catch up. And so it is common. There are some funders that have done pretty large scale efforts to provide this sort of funding. One example is the Prudential Foundation through an initiative they did in Newark about, I want to say 3 to 4 years ago, and other larger funders and smaller ones do it too. But it is a newer concept for funders, especially on the smaller end of the scale, and does require having a lot of conversations, particularly with program officers, about how to understand that type of funding so that they can advocate for the nonprofit to be able to obtain that kind of funding, or for the nonprofit organization seeking change capital for them to be able to explain that to people who are giving them donations, because it is a weird concept for a lot of people.
Anyone else want to chime in on our final question for our Q&A segment?
Well, I think it's a mindset, and a colleague there referred to it earlier. Nonprofit is really a bad word. It's not a philosophy, and it's probably not even a tax classification, but it's something we've adopted to define the sector. And it's us, we as leaders need to reclassify that money as an investment in the future. And so we have to approach it so we can have meaningful conversations with funders. They're going to help us to supercharge our organization. And everything's changed with COVID. We need to retool for the future. We need to make a pivot and do things differently. So it's a time when leaders can get going and do it. So I think it starts with a mindset, and think of it as an investment that's really important, and it's going to enable us to impact more people's lives.
All right. Thank you all so much for an amazing and very engaging conversation. Something that I do want to highlight is that we did have Mr. Williamson on the call with us at the beginning, who is currently on the ground in Haiti doing the critical work for our community and the young people there. So I just wanted to acknowledge that he was there, but for just for precaution and safety measures, that we were not able to keep him throughout our entire engagement, and just holding space for him in this moment. So now I want to bring it back to our panelists for closing remarks. We're going to do it the same order, alphabetical order, starting with Dr. Alix. So we would love to hear, is there anything else that you want to share with our audience?
No, I just want to say thank you to the organization, to NAHP for inviting me to be part of this conversation. And just, and encourage you to keep this going, to keep doing this work. And also to emphasize the need for for organizations to really look at the issue of racial equity and the systemic inequities that COVID-19 have exposed. And thank you for the opportunity to share some thoughts with you.
Thank you. And to Mr. Blane.
Again, I want to thank the Haitian professionals for inviting me here. Am I on? Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
I want to talk a little bit about YCPN. We're looking for membership. We target young people, college students, and young professionals from 18 to 45 to get involved. We have people from approximately 21 different countries from Africa, from the Caribbean, from Haiti, from Jamaica, Trinidad, Guyana, Nigeria, Benin, and so on and so forth. It goes on and on and on. We would like you to write to us at info@ycpn.org so that you can get on our mailing list. That's info@ycpn.org. YCPN is dedicated to creating access for students and young professionals, creating access to education and economic development opportunities in the Northeast. We have an active chapter with almost 100 members in Philadelphia. Our next active chapter will be in New York. Right now, we offer scholarships at the University of Pennsylvania, Temple University, Drexel University, Haverford College, Villanova, and Georgetown. And I'm sure I'm leaving out some of the colleges and universities. In New York, we will offer scholarship to diverse young people at CUNY, at NYU, and at Columbia. So we're looking for contacts with those schools. We're looking for contacts of young professionals in New York. And as soon as COVID breaks, we're going to open a chapter in New York to launch Young Professional Network in another city on the East Coast.
Thank you, Blane. Mr. Hugh?
Trust in yourself. God didn't create any junk. You can accomplish it. If you know that you can accomplish it, go from believing to knowing. And I always encourage leaders to surround themselves with people better than they are. And that's certainly the case with me today. This is an awesome group of people, so talented, so experienced, so knowledgeable. I'm so honored to be here. So I would encourage people to know that they can do it, to network with other professionals, and to move forward. The world depends on us. The future depends on us. The work of nonprofits is essential to our communities.
Thank you, Ms. Ketsia.
So thanks again for the opportunity to be a part of this panel. I certainly really enjoyed learning from the other panelists and hearing their ideas. And what I would love to encourage anybody who's listening to this or watching the recording to do is to check out some of the resources that we have at nff.org. If your organization is right now thinking about how do you know if you're going to have enough cash in 13 weeks? How can you start doing scenario planning? How can you update your budget? We have a lot of resources on our website available for free to help support you in that planning process. And more broadly, I want to say that Nonprofit Finance Fund is really dedicated to working with community-centered organizations led by and serving people of color. And we really recognize the ways in which these organizations have been systematically underfunded and under-supported. And that's something that we're committed to changing through the services that we provide. And so please take a look at some of the resources available on our website, but also do know that we are a very open organization and that if there's something that we can offer support on, we're always happy to take that conversation to see if there's a way for us to work together. And so I am wishing a lot of you all good luck. And nonprofits have been through a lot in previous times, and we know that there's a lot of resilience in the sector and ability to continue on even through this challenge. And so, yeah, thanks again for the opportunity to be here and looking forward to hopefully hearing from some of you.
Thank you to all of tonight's amazing panelists and this incredible discussion on how COVID-19 is changing the nonprofit sector and providing necessary insight and tools to keeping our communities thriving during these emerging times. I also want to give a thanks to our amazing sponsors, Book It Right Accountancy, also the Young Caribbean Professional Network, and Shokoela. Thank you all for your support, alliance, and just building community with us for this incredible conversation. So I hope you all have a great night. Thank you. Many, many, many thanks. And let's continue on building our communities.